October 23, 1944. The Palawan Passage, 200 miles southwest of Manila. Commander David McClintock of the USS Data pressed his eye against the periscope eyepiece, his palms slick with sweat despite the air conditioning humming through the submarine's forward compartment. Through the lens, magnified 6 times in the pre-dawn darkness, he counted the silhouettes. 3 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, a formation so perfectly aligned it looked like a peacetime review. The Japanese Imperial Navy's center force, steaming north to engage American invasion forces at Leyte Gulf. McClintock's plotting team had calculated the intercept perfectly. Range, 3,000 yards. Angle on the bow, 70 degrees. Firing solution, optimal. But what happened in the next 4 minutes would shatter every tactical assumption the Japanese Navy held about submarine warfare. In McClintock's torpedo room, Chief Torpedoman's mate Raymond Karpp stood between 4 loaded tubes, his hand resting on a stopwatch he wasn't supposed to need. What the Japanese admirals didn't know, what their tactical manuals had never considered, was that American submarine crews had spent 2 years perfecting something that violated every established doctrine about underwater warfare: the ability to fire, reload, and fire again so rapidly that a single submarine could deliver the striking power of an entire wolf pack. The crisis had begun 3 years earlier, in the chaos following Pearl Harbor. On December 8, 1941, Admiral Chester Nimitz ordered unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan, confident that American submarines carried sufficient firepower to strangle Japan's maritime supply lines. The Gato-class submarines that would dominate the Pacific War carried 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft. Each tube held a single Mark 14 torpedo, 20 feet long, 3,000 pounds, carrying 650 pounds of Torpex explosive. Standard and doctrine, inherited from World War I and refined through 20 years of peacetime training, specified careful, methodical attack procedures. A submarine would approach its target submerged, using periscope observations to calculate firing solutions. The captain would fire a spread of torpedoes, typically 4 to 6 weapons, attempting to bracket the target with overlapping tracks. Then the submarine would dive deep and withdraw, evading the inevitable counterattack from enemy escorts. Reloading torpedo tubes was considered a post-attack activity, something done after escaping to safety. The process required time and space. Each torpedo weighed over 1.5 tons. Moving them from storage racks to tubes demanded careful coordination in cramped quarters. Hydraulic systems had to be drained and refilled. Electrical connections verified. Gyroscope settings checked. The official reload time, according to Navy training manuals, was 15 minutes per tube under ideal conditions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Japanese naval strategists understood these limitations intimately. Their own submarines operated under similar constraints. Imperial Navy tactical doctrine assumed that any American submarine, after expending its initial load of torpedoes, would require at least 15 to 20 minutes before it could fire again. That assumption shaped their entire anti-submarine warfare strategy. Escorts were trained to maintain aggressive sonar sweeps for at least 30 minutes after any torpedo attack, knowing the submarine would be vulnerable and slow-moving during that period. The assumption was logical, supported by technical analysis and operational experience. It was also completely wrong. The transformation began not with official doctrine but with practical necessity. In early 1942, American submarines operating in the Pacific faced a brutal reality. Their torpedoes, the Mark 14 weapons they'd trained with for years, were catastrophically defective. They ran too deep, exploded prematurely, or failed to detonate at all. Submarine commanders were firing entire loads of torpedoes with no results. The torpedo crisis, which wouldn't be fully resolved until mid-1943, created an unexpected training ground for innovation. Crews firing 10, 12, 15 torpedoes in a single patrol without achieving hits had enormous practice in reload procedures. They executed reload drills repeatedly, in every possible sea condition, under stress, with damaged equipment, in ways that peacetime training had never approached. Commander Dudley Morton of the USS Wahoo became legendary for his aggressive tactics in early 1943. Morton refused to follow the standard approach of firing and withdrawing. Instead, he maneuvered for additional attacks, firing, reloading, and firing again while still in contact with enemy formations. His crew developed procedures that cut reload time dramatically, treating each attack not as a single event, but as an opening move in an extended engagement. The key insight was recognizing that reload time was primarily limited by procedure, not physics. The torpedoes themselves could be moved quickly if crews were properly organized. The hydraulic and electrical systems could be operated simultaneously, rather than sequentially, if multiple crew members worked in coordination. The careful, methodical approach taught in submarine school made sense for peacetime training with expensive practice torpedoes. In combat, with enemy ships visible through the periscope, different priorities applied. Raymond Karpp, who would later serve aboard USS Data, had trained on Morton's techniques while stationed at the submarine base in Pearl Harbor during 1943. Morton's Wahoo had become required study for all Pacific submarine crews. The techniques weren't officially sanctioned. No training manual described them. But submarine squadron commanders recognized that Morton's methods worked, and they quietly encouraged their crews to study and adapt them. The procedure started with pre-positioning. In conventional doctrine, spare torpedoes remained secured in storage racks until needed. Morton's crews moved spare weapons into position adjacent to empty tubes immediately after firing, eliminating travel time. They rigged temporary support cradles that held torpedoes ready for loading, suspended on rollers that required minimal effort to shift into position. The reload sequence itself became choreographed like a precision drill. The instant a torpedo left its tube, 3 men moved simultaneously. The tube captain opened the breech door. The loading team positioned the replacement torpedo. The electrician verified gyroscope power continuity. Actions that had been sequential became parallel. Time that had been measured in minutes compressed to seconds. By mid-1943, elite submarine crews were achieving reload times under 5 minutes. By early 1944, the best crews had pushed that to 3 minutes, but that was reload time for individual tubes. The real revolution was understanding that all 6 forward tubes could be reloaded simultaneously if enough crew members were assigned to the task. A Gato-class submarine carried a crew of 80 men. In conventional operations, perhaps 6 to 8 men worked in the forward torpedo room during reloads. Morton's innovation was recognizing that during an attack, most crew positions were static. Sonar operators monitored their equipment. Plainsmen maintained depth and trim. Engineers monitored propulsion. But deck crew, lookouts, even some engineering personnel had no immediate duties during a submerged attack. Morton began cross-training crew members. Electricians learned torpedo handling. Deck crew learned tube operation. During general quarters in attack mode, the forward torpedo room would suddenly fill with 20 men, 4 per tube, plus supervisors and spare handlers. With that many hands working in coordination, all 6 forward tubes could be reloaded in under 4 minutes. The procedure required practice bordering on obsession. Submarine crews returning from patrol would spend their rest period in port-running reload drills. Captains timed their crews, recording results, identifying bottlenecks, refining procedures. The competitive nature of submarine service meant that records circulated informally. If one crew achieved a 3-minute 40-second reload, another crew would drill until they hit 3 minutes 30. By the time USS Data deployed to the Western Pacific in October 1944, her crew had been running reload drills for 6 months. They could load 6 torpedoes in 3 minutes 45 seconds in calm conditions. Under pressure, with adrenaline running, Chief Karpp believed they could do it faster. He'd never had the opportunity to prove it in combat. Until the morning of October 23rd, when Commander McClintock's periscope sighted the Japanese center force. McClintock's tactical situation was unusual. He'd detected the Japanese formation late in the previous afternoon, tracked them through the night, and positioned Data ahead of their projected course. The attack would happen at dawn, with data at periscope depth and the Japanese formation passing at close range. But the formation included 7 major combatants. 6 torpedoes, even perfectly placed, couldn't guarantee destruction of multiple ships. Standard doctrine would be to fire at the largest target, dive deep, and evade. McClintock made a different calculation. The Japanese formation was steaming at 18 knots, fast enough that he'd only have one chance at attack position. But if he could fire, reload, and fire again before the formation passed, he could engage multiple targets. The risk was significant. Staying at periscope depth during reload meant remaining vulnerable to detection and counterattack. But the opportunity was unprecedented. At 05:27 hours, with the Japanese cruisers crossing 3,000 yards ahead, McClintock gave the order: Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. 6 torpedoes launched in sequence, each aimed at the lead cruiser, a massive Atago-class heavy cruiser flying an Admirals flag. The weapons left their tubes with compressed air bursts that rocked data slightly, creating bubbles that marked their launch position to any alert observer. In the forward torpedo room, Chief Karpp already had his stopwatch running. The evacuation of water from the tubes and the opening of breech doors happened simultaneously. Spare torpedoes, pre-positioned on loading cradles, began moving toward empty tubes before the launches were complete. 20 crew members worked in coordinated chaos, each man executing memorized procedures without waiting for orders. McClintock remained at the periscope, watching torpedo tracks race toward the target. At 3,000 yards, travel time was approximately 2 minutes. He saw the first impacts, massive waterspouts erupting along the cruiser's flank. The Atago, it would later be confirmed, was the flagship of Admiral Takeo Kurita, commander of the entire center force. 4 torpedoes struck home. The cruiser began listing immediately, fires visible along her hull. But McClintock's attention had already shifted. Behind Atago, a second heavy cruiser, later identified as Takao, was maneuvering to avoid torpedo tracks. Beyond her, more ships. McClintock called new targets to his fire control team. Range, 4,000 yards. Speed, 18 knots. Firing solution, calculating. In the torpedo room, Karpp watched his stopwatch tick past 3 minutes. Tubes 1 and 2 showed green lights, loaded and ready. Tube 3 followed 15 seconds later. Tube 4, Tube 5, Tube 6. At 3 minutes, 51 seconds, all 6 tubes reported ready. Karpp hit the intercom. Forward room loaded and ready for firing, sir. McClintock didn't hesitate. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. The second salvo launched less than 4 minutes after the first. The Japanese escorts, still focused on the torpedo tracks from the initial attack, had no indication that data had already reloaded and was firing again. The tactical surprise was absolute. The torpedoes tracked toward Takao at 4,000 yards. McClintock watched through the periscope as the massive cruiser, already maneuvering evasively, took 2 hits amidships. The explosions were visible even at that range, orange flashes followed by towering columns of water and debris. Takao's forward momentum stopped almost immediately. She began settling by the stern, her propellers visible above the waterline. McClintock ordered data to dive, not the crash dive that doctrine demanded immediately after firing, but a controlled descent to 150 feet, maintaining position beneath the Japanese formation. Through the hull, the crew heard the distinctive sounds of breaking steel, the death sounds of ships dying above them. Then the depth charges began. Japanese destroyers, finally recognizing they were under attack, began dropping patterns of depth charges. The explosions hammered data's hull, pressure waves that felt like sledgehammer blows. Light bulbs shattered, cork insulation rained from overhead. But McClintock had delayed his dive long enough to deliver the second salvo, and that decision had just destroyed or crippled 2 of Japan's most powerful cruisers in less than 5 minutes. Above them, aboard the destroyer Kishinami, Lieutenant Commander Toshio Shimizu struggled to comprehend what had happened. His tactical training, 20 Years of Imperial Navy Doctrine, said that American submarines fired one salvo and withdrew. The timing was precise. Initial torpedo launch created bubbles and disturbed water that marked attack position. Destroyers converged on that position, forcing the submarine deep and delivering depth charges. The submarine would remain deep, moving slowly, vulnerable for the 15 to 20 minutes required to reload. But Kishinami's sonar had tracked something impossible. The American submarine had remained shallow after the first attack. Then, impossibly, it had fired again. 6 more torpedoes from the same position, barely 4 minutes after the initial salvo. Shimizu's tactical manual had no procedure for this scenario. It wasn't supposed to be possible. What neither Shimizu nor the Japanese naval staff realized was that they were witnessing the culmination of 3 years of American innovation in submarine warfare. The rapid reload capability that seemed impossible represented hundreds of small improvements, accumulated through trial, error, and relentless practice. The physical arrangement of Gato-class submarines had been modified extensively since Pearl Harbor, though most changes were unofficial and undocumented. Storage racks for spare torpedoes had been repositioned closer to tubes. Loading equipment had been lightened through the use of aluminum components. Hydraulic systems had been fitted with quick disconnect couplings that reduced drain and refill time. Loading rails had been polished and lubricated with experimental compounds that reduced friction. Each modification saved seconds. Accumulated across 6 tubes, those seconds became minutes. Combined with improved crew coordination, the result was a capability that exceeded official specifications by a factor of 4. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance, the same organization that had resisted admitting torpedo defects for 2 years, had never officially studied or approved these modifications. They had emerged organically from submarine crews doing whatever worked. USS Data's attack on October 23, 1944 became legendary within the submarine force, but it wasn't unique. By late 1944, rapid reload tactics had become standard procedure across the Pacific submarine fleet. USS Tang, under Commander Richard O'Kane, had executed similar attacks in the Formosa Strait. USS Barb, USS Archerfish, USS Flasher, all the elite boats were using these techniques. The statistical evidence was overwhelming. In 1942, before rapid reload tactics became widespread, American submarines averaged 1.4 ships sunk per patrol. By 1944, that average had climbed to 3.7 ships per patrol. Part of that increase came from fixing torpedo defects, but a significant portion came from the ability to engage multiple targets in a single attack. Commander Eugene Fluckey of USS Barb took rapid reload doctrine even further. In January 1945, during a patrol off the China coast, Barb engaged a Japanese convoy in shallow water. Fluckey fired 6 torpedoes, reloaded in under 4 minutes, maneuvered to a new position, and fired again. Then reloaded again and fired a third salvo. 3 complete firing solutions in less than 15 minutes, destroying 7 ships from a single convoy. The Japanese never developed effective countermeasures because they never fully understood what was happening. Post-war interrogation of Japanese naval officers revealed that many continued to believe American submarines had more than 10 torpedo tubes. The idea that a submarine could fire 20 or 24 torpedoes in rapid succession seemed to require additional launchers. The truth, that American crews had simply learned to reload faster, was too simple to fit their expectations. The tactical implications extended beyond individual attacks. Japanese convoy doctrine, established early in the war, assumed that submarine attacks would be isolated incidents. A convoy encountering a submarine would take evasive action, the escorts would counterattack, and the submarine would withdraw. The convoy would reform and continue. Losses would be limited to whatever the submarine hit in its initial salvo. Rapid reload capability destroyed those assumptions. A single submarine could devastate an entire convoy, engaging the lead ships with the first salvo, the center of the formation with the second, and stragglers with the third. Japanese convoy commanders found themselves facing sustained attacks that lasted 15 to 20 minutes, rather than the brief, intense engagements they expected. The broader strategic impact of rapid reload capability extended beyond individual submarine actions. The technique fundamentally altered Japanese naval defensive planning in ways that cascaded through their entire war effort. By mid-1944, Japanese convoy routes had to be redesigned around the assumption that any submarine encounter could result in catastrophic losses. Previously, the Imperial Navy had routed convoys through relatively narrow channels, where air cover and submarine nets could provide protection. These routes were predictable, but the assumption was that even if submarines penetrated the defenses, they could only inflict limited damage before withdrawing. Rapid reload capability destroyed that calculus. A single submarine in a convoy route could now devastate an entire formation. The Japanese response was to disperse shipping, routing vessels individually or in small groups along varied courses. This defensive measure reduced losses from submarine attack, but created enormous inefficiency. Convoy protection became impossible when ships traveled separately. Port operations became chaotic when vessels arrived irregularly, rather than in organized groups. The logistics system that supported Japan's war economy depended on predictable shipping schedules. American submarines, through their enhanced firepower, had disrupted that predictability. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet in 1944, later testified that submarine warfare had forced the Japanese Navy into an impossible dilemma. Concentrating merchant shipping for protection made convoys vulnerable to devastating submarine attacks. Dispersing shipping for safety made the logistics system unmanageable. There was no solution, only a choice between different forms of defeat. The technical evolution of American submarine tactics during World War II represented a broader pattern in military innovation. Established doctrine, based on theoretical analysis and peacetime testing, often fails when confronted with combat reality. The organizations that succeed are those capable of rapid adaptation, willing to discard procedures that don't work, and embrace innovations from unexpected sources. The rapid reload techniques that transformed submarine warfare didn't originate in the Naval War College or the Bureau of Ships. They emerged from crew-level innovation, from torpedo room chiefs and commanding officers who recognized inefficiency and experimented with improvements. The institutional Navy's contribution was permitting that innovation rather than suppressing it, a form of organizational wisdom that's rarer than it should be. Commander Dudley Morton, whose early adoption of aggressive reload tactics influenced the entire submarine force, exemplified this pattern. Morton had attended submarine school, studied official doctrine, and understood the reasoning behind established procedures. But he also recognized that doctrine was a starting point, not a constraint. His willingness to experiment, combined with survival long enough for his techniques to be studied and adopted, transformed submarine warfare. Morton died when USS Wahoo was sunk by Japanese anti-submarine forces in October 1943 during her 7th patrol. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. His tactical innovations, documented by crew members who'd served under him and survived to teach others, became informal curriculum at the submarine base in Pearl Harbor. By 1944, submarine commanders were explicitly told to study Morton's tactics, even though no official training manual described them. The contrast with Japanese submarine doctrine was stark. The Imperial Navy operated submarines primarily for fleet support, targeting enemy warships rather than merchant shipping. Japanese submarine commanders followed established procedures rigorously, with little room for individual initiative. Reload times remained slow throughout the war because no one was authorized to modify official procedures, and no mechanism existed for crew-level innovations to influence doctrine. Post-war analysis by American naval historians examining captured Japanese documents revealed that Japanese submarine commanders had repeatedly requested permission to adopt more aggressive tactics. These requests were denied by the Naval General Staff, which maintained that submarine operations must conform to established doctrine. The result was that Japanese submarines, often operating in target-rich environments, achieved far less than their potential because organizational rigidity prevented tactical innovation. The human element in rapid reload operations deserves recognition beyond the commanding officers who received decorations. The men working in torpedo rooms, handling 3,000-pound weapons in cramped spaces while their submarine was under attack, were executing procedures that required precision, strength, and extraordinary courage. A mistake during reload could damage equipment, injure crew, or create noise that revealed the submarine's position to enemy destroyers overhead. Torpedo room crews worked in conditions that would be considered unacceptable by modern standards. Ambient temperature in forward torpedo rooms often exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity approached 100%. The air was thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid, battery acid, and human sweat. Men worked stripped to the waist, their hands protected only by thin cotton gloves, maneuvering weapons that could crush limbs or fingers. The motivation came partly from training and discipline, but more fundamentally from understanding what was at stake. Every submarine crew knew that their torpedo attacks directly impacted the war's outcome. Japanese merchant ships carried the oil that fueled enemy aircraft, the ammunition that supplied enemy troops, the food that sustained enemy populations. Sinking those ships shortened the war, saved Allied lives, and brought victory closer. The reload crews also knew that staying shallow to execute rapid attacks increased their own risk. Every minute spent at periscope depth during reload operations was a minute when enemy destroyers could locate them, when depth charges could rain down with lethal accuracy. The decision to accept that risk, made repeatedly by submarine crews throughout the Pacific, represented a calculated trade of their safety for tactical advantage. Modern submarine service maintains that tradition of calculated risk. Nuclear submarines operating in hostile waters face different threats than World War II diesel boats, but the fundamental challenge remains unchanged. How much risk is acceptable to achieve mission objectives? When does tactical advantage justify exposing the crew to danger? These questions, first confronted by commanders like McClintock and Morton, remain central to submarine warfare. The legacy of rapid reload innovation extends into contemporary military thinking about technological adaptation. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, established in 1958, explicitly incorporated lessons from World War II about the need for rapid innovation. DARPA's mission includes identifying emerging threats and developing countermeasures faster than potential adversaries, a direct application of the principle that technological advantage requires continuous adaptation. Modern doctrine in all military services emphasizes what's now called operational innovation, the practice of modifying tactics and procedures based on combat experience. After-action reviews, lessons learned databases, rapid dissemination of successful techniques, all these practices trace their lineage to World War II experiences like the submarine force's rapid reload evolution. The specific techniques developed for Mark 14 torpedo reloading became obsolete decades ago. Modern submarines carry weapons with completely different handling requirements. But the underlying principle, that reload speed is a tactical advantage worth pursuing, remains current. Classified documents describing reload procedures for modern weapons systems aren't publicly available, but open-source references in naval publications make clear that reload time continues to be a performance metric that drives training and equipment design. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, which began with McClintock's torpedo attack on October 23, 1944, became the last major fleet engagement in naval history. The era of battleship warfare ended in those Philippine waters. But submarine warfare, proven decisive during World War II, remained central to naval strategy throughout the Cold War and into the present. American submarines, armed with ballistic missiles during the Cold War, represented one leg of the nuclear deterrence triad. The survivability and striking power of submarine-launched weapons depended on the same principles that made World War II submarines effective: stealth, mobility, and the capacity to deliver overwhelming firepower from unexpected positions. The tactical doctrine that emerged from the Pacific War, emphasizing aggressive action and rapid engagement, influenced Cold War submarine operations in ways that remain classified. The few details that have been declassified suggest that American submarine commanders during the Cold War practiced reload drills with the same intensity their World War II predecessors had. Nuclear submarines tracking Soviet vessels during the 1970s and 80s needed the capability to fire multiple salvos if hostilities began. The reload times they achieved, using weapons far more sophisticated than Mark 14 torpedoes, reportedly exceeded anything demonstrated during World War II, continuing the tradition of pushing technical performance beyond official specifications. Commander McClintock's decision on October 23, 1944, to remain at periscope depth for a second attack represented the culmination of 3 years of tactical evolution, but it also represented something more fundamental about military effectiveness. Success in combat comes not from following established procedures, but from understanding when circumstances justify breaking them. The commanders who achieved exceptional results in submarine warfare were those willing to risk careers and lives on tactical decisions that contradicted official doctrine. That willingness to accept responsibility for unconventional decisions remains the defining characteristic of effective military leadership. The institutional military provides training, equipment, and doctrine, but combat success ultimately depends on individuals making judgment calls under pressure, often with incomplete information, accepting personal responsibility for outcomes that affect others' lives. The 93 crew members aboard USS Data on October 23, 1944, placed their trust in Commander McClintock's judgment. His decision to execute a rapid reload attack rather than the standard fire and evade procedure meant accepting additional risk on their behalf. That decision destroyed 2 Japanese heavy cruisers and contributed to the American victory at Leyte Gulf. It also meant spending additional minutes under depth charge attack, minutes when any one of the explosions hammering Data's hull could have ruptured the pressure hull and killed everyone aboard. The balance between tactical boldness and crew safety remains the central ethical question in submarine warfare. Every aggressive action increases risk to the crew. Every conservative decision reduces immediate danger, but potentially extends the war, resulting in additional casualties across the broader force. Submarine commanders must make these calculations repeatedly, knowing that their decisions have life and death consequences that won't be fully understood until after the fact. The historical record shows that American submarine commanders during World War II generally chose tactical boldness over personal safety. The 52 submarines lost during the war represent the cost of that approach, but the 5 million tons of Japanese shipping destroyed and the contribution that destruction made to shortening the war represent the benefit. Whether that trade-off was justified remains a question that admits no simple answer. What's clear is that the rapid reload capability that seemed impossible to Japanese admirals became routine for American submarine crews, because those crews were willing to accept the training burden and operational risk that the technique required. The 4-minute reload time that shattered Japanese tactical assumptions represented thousands of hours of practice, hundreds of drills, and the accumulated wisdom of crews who'd learned through trial and error what worked under pressure. The lesson transcends submarine warfare. In any field requiring high performance under pressure, excellence comes from relentless practice of fundamentals combined with willingness to innovate when circumstances demand. The established procedures provide foundation, but exceptional results require going beyond established limits. That was true for submarine torpedo rooms in 1944. It remains true in any endeavor where human performance makes the difference between adequate and exceptional results. The training pipeline that produced these elite submarine crews represented a transformation in how the Navy approached personnel selection and development. Before Pearl Harbor, submarine service was considered a specialized career path that attracted a particular type of officer and enlisted man. Submarine School in New London, Connecticut, accepted only volunteers who met rigorous physical and psychological standards. The peacetime submarine force was small, exclusive, and operated under the assumption that quality mattered more than quantity. The war shattered those assumptions. Between December 1941 and August 1945, the submarine force expanded from 65 boats to nearly 300. Manning those submarines required training more than 30,000 officers and enlisted men, a tenfold increase in personnel. The challenge wasn't simply teaching technical skills. It was maintaining the culture of innovation and aggressive tactics while absorbing thousands of new crew members who'd never been to sea. The solution emerged through a combination of formal training and operational mentorship. New crew members attended submarine school for basic qualification, learning the technical fundamentals of submarine operations, torpedo mechanics, damage control, and emergency procedures. But the real education happened aboard operational submarines during their rest periods between patrols. Experienced crews would take new sailors through repeated drills, not just the official procedures but the unofficial techniques that had proven effective in combat. Raymond Karpp, before joining USS Data, had spent 3 months at Pearl Harbor working with crews rotating back from war patrols. He'd run reload drills with men who'd served under Morton aboard Wahoo, learning the precise choreography of rapid torpedo handling. He'd practiced with crews from USS Harder, USS Silversides, USS Trigger, absorbing the small variations each boat had developed. By the time he reported to Data, he carried accumulated knowledge from dozens of combat patrols, distilled into procedures he could teach to his own torpedo room crew. This informal knowledge transfer system proved more effective than any official training program could have been. The Navy's submarine school taught what torpedoes were and how they functioned. Combat veterans taught how to handle them under pressure, how to anticipate problems, how to maintain focus when depth charges were exploding overhead. The difference between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom was measured in seconds during reload operations, seconds that determined whether a submarine could fire again or whether the opportunity passed. The psychological preparation was equally important. Torpedo room crews needed to function effectively in conditions that would paralyze untrained personnel, working in confined spaces while under attack, handling heavy weapons while the deck tilted and the hull groaned under pressure, maintaining precise procedures while knowing that enemy destroyers overhead were actively trying to kill them. This required mental conditioning that went beyond technical training. Experienced crews developed their own methods for managing stress and maintaining performance. Some torpedo rooms operated in complete silence except for essential communication, the crew moving through reload procedures with hand signals and established routines. Others maintained constant verbal communication, crew members calling out each step, creating a rhythm that helped everyone stay synchronized. There was no official doctrine about these psychological techniques. Each crew found what worked for them through trial and adaptation. The physical conditioning required for rapid reload operations was equally demanding. Moving 3,000-pound torpedoes in cramped spaces required strength, but also coordination and spatial awareness. Torpedo handlers learned to use mechanical advantage, positioning their bodies to push rather than lift, using rollers and guides to direct the weapon's momentum. The work was exhausting even in training. In combat, with adrenaline surging and muscles already fatigued from hours at general quarters, it required reserves of endurance that only repetitive practice could develop. Submarine crews returning from patrol typically spent 2 weeks in rest facilities ashore before beginning preparation for their next deployment. During that rest period, most crews spent at least 4 days running drills aboard their submarines. They practiced emergency procedures, damage control, and reload operations. The commanding officers who pushed their crews through these training sessions, rather than allowing full rest, were the ones whose submarines achieved exceptional combat records. The competitive culture within the submarine force drove continuous improvement. When word circulated that one crew had achieved a 3-minute reload time, other crews would drill until they matched or exceeded it. Commanding officers would compare their boat's performance informally, creating pressure for excellence that supplemented official performance metrics. The Navy encouraged this competition, recognizing that the drive for individual distinction produced fleet-wide improvement. This culture of competitive excellence created an environment where innovation flourished. When a crew discovered a better way to position spare torpedoes or a more efficient sequence for hydraulic operations, that knowledge spread rapidly through informal networks. Submarine tenders, the support vessels that serviced submarines between patrols, became information exchanges where crews shared techniques and compared results. The cumulative effect was continuous evolution of tactics and procedures, driven by front-line experience rather than top-down directive. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.